So maybe you have a camera like this, an entry-level DSLR or mirrorless camera, something that's not really spec heavy when it comes to video, but is still a great candidate for those trying to get into filmmaking. And so maybe you just picked this up recently, or you've had it for a while, been shooting some videos, and you're ready to take that next leap in your cinematography to get to that filmic, movie-like image quality. Well, we're going to talk about some ways to achieve that look for little to no money at all. So let's dive into it. Okay, so let's get out of the way. Cinematography is very subjective. There are a whole bunch of filmmakers who are finding new ways to stylize light and compose scenes, but of course with any art form there's always going to be foundational rules that you have to follow before you get to that level of experimentation. And that's what we're going to cover today, specifically through the lens, quote unquote, sorry for that bad pun, of budget equipment. So in this case, a budget camera, and then also just working with light provided to us by the sun. So it's free, you can utilize that. And so yeah, we're gonna focus primarily on using natural light for a lot of this episode. So that's gonna be what we're focusing on. We're gonna try and make a camera like this, the Canon T7i, again, a budget-friendly DSLR camera. I don't think they make this anymore. I think they make the T8i, which is still equivalent. But this camera only shoots 1080. The dynamic range, which is that coverage of detail between the shadows and highlights, is not great. It doesn't have a log profile like the R6, but we're going to try and make it look like a shot out of the R6. And the shots that I do have, that I have examples for in this episode, I think look really, really great. I'm actually really happy with them. I can't wait to break them down with you. But yeah. Also, I want to emphasize that this episode is going to be entirely indoor cinematography. There is a difference between outdoor and indoor cinematography, but I do feel that indoor cinematography is a lot more challenging, especially for working on a budget. And I feel if you can master these concepts indoors, it's going to be a lot easier to adjust to outdoor cinematography. But maybe we'll do a separate episode on outdoor cinematography. But why do I feel that it's more challenging indoors? Well, of course, when you're outside, you have that luxurious, bright sun providing infinite amount of light throughout the day until nighttime. So I guess it's not really infinite. But when you're indoors, of course, your light kind of gets minimized to what's available for you, specifically through your windows. So all of these shots are going to be lit naturally through window light, except for the last one. We're going to say that it's going to be a nighttime shot, and we're going to talk about that one as kind of our final summation of everything. Alright, so let's dive into it, and let's talk about these first set of shots and our first tip of the video. Alright, so what is the first tip I'm going to give you in terms of indoor cinematography? You've probably heard this before from other filmmakers on YouTube, but when it comes to tighter focal length shots, so ones that are more character focused, character driven, you want to have that nice, soft wrap of light on their face, a nice soft source of light, and you already have that provided for you with your best friends for indoor cinematography, windows. So the sun is shining down on the ground and it is reflecting light back through the window. That's already, again, a nice soft source of light. So you already have that provided for you, which is great. So of course, the closer to the window you're going to get, the brighter source of light you're going to have. So of course, for this first shot where I'm directly right next to the window, and then also the further away you get from it, so the second shot, the softer source of light it's going to be. So you might have to adjust your camera, boost the ISO, or open up your aperture a little bit, depending on how far you decide to pull away from that window. But again, the windows are going to be your best source of soft light. And soft light, why is it important to have soft light? Well, soft light is just going to be the most pleasing on human skin tones and human facial features. Again, having that nice wrap around. If you had a harder source of light, so let's say like the sun is right over there, it's right on the horizon, it's shining through, I'm going to have a pretty much bright source of light right here, and then all the shadow side of my face is pretty much going to be crushed. It's going to be a loss of detail right there, and especially on cameras like this Canon T7i right here, you're definitely going to lose detail because, again, the dynamic range is not great, not having a log profile. So yeah, you want to make sure you have that nice soft source of light kind of wrapping around because it's going to retain the most detail within your image and, again, look the most pleasing. This doesn't mean that harsh light is bad in any kind of way. You could definitely use it for different methods. So I mean, if you have a specific style of shot, sometimes a harder source of light might be better. But again, these more character focused shots, the softer light is going to look good. But I do actually have some elements of harsher light in this opening shot, or not really opening shot, but first shot of me sitting right next to the window. I do have these harsher bits of light on my cardigan right there on my arm and on my shoulder, and so these are really nice because they actually add a little bit of light texture to the image. And so light texture is nice because it provides that kind of difference between softer source of light on the subject's face and just kind of providing elements of context within the world. So I mean, here we do have the sun shining through the window, and because we have these harder sources source of light, it actually kind of shows that yes, we do have the sunlight shining through the window a little bit. Maybe it's still a little bit early morning. So yeah, hard light can still be used to your advantage. You just want to use it sparingly, and you want to use it for the right circumstances as well. But again, first tip, try and get a soft source of light on your subject's face, and that soft source of light is going to be windows, especially indoors. So let's move on to tip number 2. Okay, so tip number 2. What is tip number 2? And this is something that you don't always have to abide by with your cinematography. There are exceptions, and we'll talk about that, but it is is that you always want to direct your camera towards the shadow side of your subject's face. And why is this? We're kind of doing an example now, but I'll also pull it up in the other shots that I've taken. But you get this nice little contrast gradient on your character, and so it really does make them stand out. Why does it make them stand out? Well, if you can see this light, this backlight, which we call a back key light because it's our brightest source of light shining onto our character, it's acting as kind of a nice little separation from the background, which is a little darker. And so that is great. Again, it makes your character stand out a little more, and then also just adds a little bit more flair to the character's facial features and skin tones as well. Adds character to your character in some way with that contrast gradient. So that's why you want to shoot shadow side primarily, but again, there are some exceptions. We're going to talk about that in a second. But in these situations, especially working on budget gear like a Canon T7i or something similar to it, again, the dynamic range isn't great, so you do run the risk, even with softer source of light, that you might be losing detail in your shadowed areas. And so you want to make sure you prevent this. So how do you prevent this? Well, you do need to buy another piece of equipment, but don't worry, this stuff is really inexpensive to get, and that is something like a 5-in-1 disc. You don't even have to get this, you just need something that bounces light, but this 5-in-1 disc, it comes with, again, 5-in-1 options to kind of bounce or collect light within a scene. And so you have this white side, which is our bounce. We have another kind of bounce reflective side, which is gold if you want to have those warmer tones. There's a silver side as well, a black side, which we call a flag, which actually adds contrast to a scene, but we don't want to do that for this. And then there is a diffuser if you are shooting outside in harsher light, and you want to cut down on that light to create that softer look, but we don't have to use that today. We're primarily going to be using the bounce side of this 5-in-1 disc. And so yeah, so I used this 5-in-1 disc. I placed it on the side of where my shadowed side would be of my face, and made sure that it faced towards the back key light as well, so the sunlight. And so it would bounce some of that sunlight back into this side of my face to kind of lift up those shadows or bring in fill. So that would be a fill light. And so that way you can retain detail even if you are trying to color grade, and you're not losing that if you're adding a little bit of contrast or a little bit of shadow, all of that. So yeah, so that's why you want to have a nice little 5-in-1 disc to add some fill into that shadow side, especially working with budget gear like a Canon T7i or something similar to it. But yeah, there are exceptions to this rule. You can shoot with kind of the brighter side towards the camera as well, but that means that you have to add some depth to your image, which is actually tip number 3. So let's talk about that next. So what is depth within your image? Well, depth refers to a photography principle called depth of field. So you have shallow depth of field, which is on display right now. I'm in focus, but the background is out of focus. If we had extended depth of field, well, then I would be in focus, and so would that lamp as well. But for these character-driven shots, you really want to focus on more of that shallow depth of field, isolating your subject from the background, which outside, it's easy because you have that vast open space. It's easy to isolate a subject from a background like that, but indoors, when you're a little more confined, sometimes it can be difficult, especially just trying to prevent your image from being a little too flat, especially if your subject is too close to a wall. So we're going to talk about ways in which you can kind of get around that really easily. So first thing you could do is just move your character away from the walls. So that's what I did for this shot with me kind of looking out the window. The chair that I'm in is already 4 feet away from that back wall over there. And then I have that lamp on. I turn that on just to fill in the shadow, but actually that really does help in terms of emphasizing that separation from the background, because you have that out of focus element, that bokeh, which really adds something to the image, again, by filling in that shadow, but again, helps indicate that separation from the background. So always take in consideration having out of focus elements in the background, some little bit of character in your background. But yeah, next things next is that you just have to change your angle sometimes. So for the shot of me sitting on the couch further away from the window, if you turn the camera actually directly at me, like kind of like this, there wouldn't have been much separation from the background because I would have only been maybe about a foot and a half away from that back wall. So by changing the angle, facing it more towards the corner of the room on the opposite side where that lamp is at as well. I mean, the lamp again adds some character, but by aiming it in the corner, you've already established this extended depth within the room, that depth of field, that shallow depth of field, isolating that subject within that space. So between moving your subject away from walls and changing your camera angles a bit, while also kind of taking into consideration maybe shooting shadow side as well, that's a few ways that you can add depth to your image. So I talked about how depth can actually kind of go counter to the last tip, but how that's not a bad thing. And that is because, so we talked about contrast in the last tip and that contrast gradient on the face, but what if you created contrast within your foreground and your background element? So if your foreground element is brighter, let's say your subject, and your background is a little darker, you have that contrast difference, and the audiences are actually going to be driven more towards the brighter part of your image, which would be then your subject rather than your background. So that works perfectly towards that. So in this kind of inverse shot of the last one of me on the couch, again, kind of pointing towards the corner of the room, so you have that depth, you have that lamp right there, so a little more character to the background, but I am brighter because I'm getting the window light, and the background is somewhat darker. It could be a little more darker by using a flag or something like that, but it is somewhat more darker, so you still have that contrast difference between the two, and it makes the subject stand out more. So that's how you run counter to shooting shadow using depth. So let's talk about filming at night real quickly. And this is going to be a nice little culmination of everything that we talked about, all the concepts put together. But before we do, we have to address that, of course, that beautiful sun will now be going down below the horizon and we'll no longer have that light source. So you're going to have to add a light source to your kit. And I do recommend one in particular, and that is this. This is a Luxio light wand. They go for about 50 to 60 bucks online, especially if you want to try and get a stand with it, which I actually do recommend if you can. This thing is bright. It's also RGB, so it changes if you want to do that. But it is awesome. I love it. And so that paired with the 5-in-1 disc, it won't really break the bank. If anything, you're spending about $100 to $110 between both items, and you can do a lot with them. So let's talk about how I implemented those into the shot, the night shot. But let's actually kind of do a breakdown between all the different concepts. So first thing, of course, we want to add our depth to our image. So the angle of our camera is facing towards the back of the room, towards the corner. And of course, we have to illuminate the back. So we have a lamp going there. So it adds a little bit of character, but it also acts as our motivating light source for this. So next, of course, we have to set up our next light, because the light from that lamp will not reach over to how far I am on the bed, especially with the Canon T7i, the dynamic range not being great, but even with the R6, it would struggle as well. So how do we start to get that nice wrap around? Well, what I did was I put my 5-in-1 disc bounce on my windowsill, and then I set up the Luxio light on a stand, and I pointed it directly into that bounce, and so I got that soft diffuse light onto my face acting as that back key, and then we started shooting shadow side. And that's it. That's a simple, easy way to get a great dramatic night shot that can work well for your films. Nothing too crazy, but it applied all three concepts into one quick and easy shot. I hope you found this video helpful. It was a lot of fun, especially to kind of revisit using the Canon T7i for cinematography again. It's been a while since I've really used it, but I definitely see the power behind it now. And so I guess next time I'll have to try and maybe do some outside cinematography as well with it. Let me know if that's something you all may want. But until that next video, keep creating, keep having fun, and I'll see you all soon. Bye.